Hello, everyone. This is Diana, and this is our takeaways for Virtual Harp Summit 3. I can't believe that it happened, 8-9 weeks ago, maybe even 10 weeks ago. So I thought now would be the perfect time to recap some of the main themes, because as you know, we had about 40 hours of material. All of that was brand new. And so that's a lot. That's a lot of stuff. So I thought by doing a takeaways, we would be able to get those main themes and make sure that we're actually using them in our harping. So I'm excited to see people rolling in here. Yay. So I see Valerie, Anya. Welcome, 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 everybody. As you know, our theme was arranging, improvising, and composing. And I put them sort of in order of scariness. Improvising tends to be somewhere in the middle. Arranging is easier for many people because you're working with fixed material. You're fixed in terms of your melody usually, or perhaps you're arranging over a chord progression. Improvisation is a little bit more freeform. And then composition is surprisingly intimidating to people. I think because of the factor of writing it down, perhaps, or the factor of formality. But none of those need to be scary. And in fact, they're all incredibly related. So I'm looking forward to sharing some of those insights with you today about how to make it a lot easier. So if you have any questions, feel free to type them into the comments below, and I will be looking at them and answering them. We have a lot to cover. We're going to go for about an hour, is my hope. Hopefully not much more than that, but it's a lot to condense about 40 hours of material into 1 hour. So I really recommend you getting out a piece of paper, starting to take notes. There will be a replay of this available, so I encourage watching the replay as well. So let me know where you're listening in from, what questions you have. I love making this interactive, as you know, and I will actually start in right away. My very first takeaway was listen. When it comes to arranging and improvising and composing, listening is key, and that means having a wide musical vocabulary. So just like we speak, we have a musical vocabulary. If we have a big vocabulary of words, we can also have a big vocabulary musically. Now, when we have a big musical vocabulary, meaning we have a wide understanding of things like dynamics. Hey, Margie. Wide understanding of dynamics, wide feeling for different kinds of tempos, different styles, different forms, different genres, then we're able to draw on those feelings so much easier, rather than there's just kind of this feeling inside you, but you can't quite articulate it literally. And so a theme that I found over and over again throughout all the presenters, where they were saying things like listen to many different styles of music, even styles of music that you don't necessarily like right now, because you will still learn from them. Go to live concerts that will open up your ears to the possibilities of what the harp can do. And then go hear other instruments. Like, think about how Mary Dumani really recommends looking at the harp as orchestra. And she had all these drum effects, all these guitar effects. Think about what Tunde was saying regarding the kora and bringing together both classical aspects from his cello work and then African from his choral work. So, hey, Mia. So bringing all of these together, all these different styles, just helps you come up with ideas, so that literally when you're looking for a certain feeling, say you want to have a very poignant sound, you know your modes. And so with modes, you would say, oh, well, I want that poignant sound. I'm going to go probably little bit of Mixolydian if I'm not going to be too sad. If I want really like poignant and dignified, I'm going to go for Dorian. So by having this vocabulary that you can draw on, really it makes your arranging, your improvising, and your composing much less of a mystery. So this is the part where, you're bringing in your scales, your modes, other devices that we'll talk about a little bit later when I talk about tools, another major takeaway that we got. as you're working through, these different types of vocabulary, you're finding out what you're resonating with and what speaks to you, like what kinds of effects and sounds really mean something to you, and pay great attention to that, listen to that, because that is actually your style developing. So what I play when I have my compositions or my improvisations or my arrangements is what I like. I do know other techniques, but they don't necessarily speak to me in the same way. So Mia, modes are types of scales going beyond the major and minor. Now, major and minor are modes as well, but they have kind of taken over the shop. And we think of them as the only modes in town. They are not. There are many others. So, Mia, I highly recommend either you watch all our workshops on modes that we have from Virtual Harp Summit, or look on YouTube and just type in what are modes, and you'll be able to find out a lot of information on that. Modes are basically instant expression, I would say, for very, very shorthand, instant expression. And I see that Diane is here as well. Hey, from New Mexico. Great to have you. And again, any questions you guys have, I am here to answer them live at this moment. So the listening aspect, my first big takeaway is listen to many types of music, become sophisticated in your musical tastes, because that will bring much more to your harping. And then listen to yourself. What do you really like? Because that is your style developing. And the stronger you listen to yourself and go with your style, the deeper your style will be. So we want to arrange, improvise, and compose in a way that resonates with us, not just because we think we should add that chord there or we should compose a certain style. Those things won't stick. What really is going to stick is what matters in your heart. So listen to yourself when you are working on your arranging, your composing, and your improvising. You're welcome, Mia. Now, the next major takeaway is actually keep it simple. Arranging, improvising, and composing does not need to be complicated. In fact, it really should be the opposite, especially at first when you're building your initial structure of the song. Later, as the song is developing, if you want to make it more complicated, if it needs to be more complicated, if you listen and it says, hey, I want more complexity here, great. But definitely start simple, because it will be much truer sounding. It will sound much more genuine. And what are some examples of this simplicity? Well, Alice Giles, for example, was talking about simply the resonance of the harp. So appreciating the sound of one tone. Really listening to that. That the beauty of the harp is in this resonance. Not necessarily in a bunch of notes. I mean, that can sound very cool too. But notice the power of that simplicity. And the essential nature of the harp is to ring. Now, if you play a different kind of instrument, get to know what the essential nature of that instrument is. So Alice was demonstrating in her workshop about Hindemith that he actually allows for these massive resonances. And what does he do? He doesn't put a bunch of notes into the picture. He also will tend towards very wide chords like that. So here's a wide chord versus a kind of short chord. So there's a triad, two triads in closed position. Is that bringing out the best of the harp? Let's take a listen. Versus. So the second chord was much simpler, in my opinion. So looking always for that resonance and simplicity rather than I need to fill in a bunch of chords. When Lawrence was giving his workshop, he was also really emphasizing the idea of space in music. So by leaving space between notes, that can be more touching than which is nice too, But was that more moving? Again, listen for the application that you're playing in. What's a situation that you're playing in? What is being called for? There is no cookie cutter formula in this, keeping it simple. Really, the idea is constantly listen for the expression and listen for what the harp wants to do and also what your heart wants to do. So we have the resonance of the harp itself. Then we have the idea of allowing space to linger, not filling everything up with note, note, note. On the harp, less is more. And this is also something that Jillian was saying in her workshop about singing and playing the harp at the same time. She was saying, honestly, singing a beautiful melody accompanied by simple chords is gorgeous. It doesn't have to be hard. It doesn't have to be that you're just filling in with a lot of busyness. That's not more effective. I mean, think about the music of Lorena McKennitt, for example. She's supporting a beautiful vocal with very, very simple playing, and it totally works. I think if she added a more complex harp accompaniment, it would actually take away from what she's doing. And of course, in our arranging, improvising, and composing, we want more expression, not less. So this idea of simplicity was just brought up again and again by all the presenters. I think about Vicente. He was showing us how to improvise on historical bass lines, giving a very simple bass line. Some of them, one of them was just 4 notes long. So he was walking down from A to G, F, E. That's it, and it repeats. So simple, then adding 1 note. I'm not even thinking about what I'm playing on the right hand. I'm just keeping that bass line moving. You might even want to try this right now if you have a harp on you. But notice how compelling that was. Just walking down. Now I'm playing 2 notes on the right hand. Now, that could be much more expressive than just playing chord after chord after chord. So say I'm going to actually fill these out as chords now, just to give you a demonstration. Was that more expressive? You be the judge, but I personally found the more spacious version to be more expressive. Admittedly, I was playing it with better dynamics too, but it didn't have the busyness of that other version. In this simplicity, Sue was talking about Sue Richards, the glory of the melody. Now, her concentration is Celtic music, as you know, and she really believes that the melody is queen when it comes to the harp. And so then when you are bringing in that accompaniment, make sure it doesn't step all over the melody. This is actually, of course, what Jillian was saying as well. I mean, so many of the same themes kept coming up with different viewpoints. To me, I always think about a diamond, and you're looking at all the different sides of the diamond. We're getting at something very core and very truthful. So Sue is very clear on watch for that melody, because your intention is to bring out the melody, not to step on it. So again, a melody, if it has a very busy accompaniment, gets lost. Thinking about Beth, she was talking about the very foundation of music. And I always love this concept of music is about tension and release. That's the lifeblood of music. And always be thinking of that. That could be your go-to. For me, that's the very fundamental nature of music is like the very waves that found the universe. Tension, release. That's what a wave is. And your music is going to have that too. So for example, say we go back to Vicente's bass line. I start out with A, and I answer with an A. No tension. G. There's an F. There's some tension there. So let's listen to that. We've got to resolve it. Resolved. Tension, resolution. So let me play that now in real time. You can hear this constant lifeblood happening. Now, if I don't allow any tension to happen, this is what it's going to sound like. It's not bad. There's a little bit of tension in there, but it's quite static. Here's the ultimate. I'll stay on one chord. There's no tension. I'll just play members of that chord. I could even go in other parts of the harp, but I'm not building any tension up. It's static. Let's get some tension. Now I've got tension. Resolve. So you're constantly looking for those tension and release points. And that is why on the harp, it's so great. When you make a mistake, it's actually adding in a little bit of juicy tension. Let me show you. I'll play an A minor chord in the left. And now I'm going to put a B against it. Hear that tension? So an A minor chord in the left, a B note on the right. Now I'm going to resolve. I come up to an A. So again, tension, release, tension, release. I'm going to resolve the other way now. I'm going to go B, A, tension. So poignant. All I needed was that one discord. I'm going to hang on. So there is an example of tension and release in real life. Lawrence and others had mentioned the idea of really just playing on with one note, lingering on that one note for a while before you move on. So for instance, I might linger on that discord. I'm still on it. Now I moved on. And, one aspect that is just across all types of music, and this is definitely part of the Keep It Simple, is the beginner's mind. And Laurie had talked about this amongst others. The idea that you are playing when you play the harp, that you come in and you treat it as an exploration. You don't come to the harp with a set of rules, because those rules are going to constrict you when you are arranging, improvising, and composing. Jillian said it really well. Don't let people tell you what is right or what should be right or should be wrong. Instead, by having this beginner's mind, you have a very simple approach. It's very straightforward. You come at the harp and you're like, what would this sound like? I'm just kind of grabbing clusters. Where does my breath want to go? In this case, I'm just playing around. I'm like, what shape does my hand want to land on? What rhythm do I want to play? Today I want to go with my breathing, which is pretty slow right now. Because I'm talking about one of my favorite subjects. Arranging, improvising, and composing. I just am following. I'm not even thinking. I'm just following. Where does my heart want to go? So literally playing, I'm not thinking, oh, here I'm playing an A chord. Okay, now I'm going to do a G. Well, then I had better do an F. And now I better do an E. That's okay to, work with that. And we'll talk about that in a little minute when we cover tools. But even more important is to come with this freshness. So maybe you are thinking, I'm going to work on Vicente's bass line A, G, F, E, and you're playing it. You go to G, now it's F next. And then you say, actually, you know what? I want to go ahead and go to D. And then back home. Oh, well, that was cool. Let's hear how that sounds. That was fun. That was a variation. So instead of A, G, F, E, I went A, G, D, and then back home to A. Fun stuff. And again, because I was in this sort of beginner's mind, that gave me the freedom to experiment, just like children. I mean, literally, when I think about beginner's mind, I think about kids in a sandbox. And just kind of messing around. I mean, they're not agonizing over whether their castle has X number of turrets or whatever. They really are just experimenting with this creation. And they're experimenting in a very unselfconscious way. So a part of beginner's mind is knowing that no one's watching you. And if anybody is, you're going to ignore them. You're going to act, play as if no one is watching or listening. It really, really will free you up to some mysterious things that come through. Mysterious types of inspiration, which we have called the muse for millennia, actually, at this point. I really believe a lot of that is being open with the beginner's mind and not shunting everything through filters. We tend to filter a lot of our experience. And what would it be like to just throw all of that off and just encounter your harp directly? So again, if you guys have any questions, I'm here for you. We had talked first about the listening as a huge takeaway. Deep listening, both in terms of listening to other types of music, listening to what is coming out of your harp, and listening to what's coming out of your heart. Listen to yourself and your reactions as you are arranging, improvising, and composing. The second one was keep it simple. And we looked at the simple nature of the harp, that resonance is key, that less is more, that you don't need a lot of busy accompaniment. Otherwise, that can actually really step all over the resonance. The idea of meditating on very few notes, actually. The idea of beginner's mind, where you're just quite simply in contact with your harp and yourself. And that other lifeblood of music where it's all about the tension and release. Tension, release. So you're always looking for those moments of crunchiness for your music to come alive and propel forward, which is why on the harp we never have to be afraid about mistakes, because all they're doing is adding a beautiful discord. And then, whoop, the sun is coming in. Okay, so my next big takeaway for you is to gather and refine your tools. Vast majority of our presenters talked about this quite a bit. And this is where we get really practical. This is where you start learning about theory. Theory doesn't have to be scary, and it definitely doesn't have to be only for note readers. I think this is a big misconception that's out there, that if I learn theory, it means I need to learn how to read music. And it absolutely doesn't mean that at all. Just like I look at my harp right now, and I'm like, oh, here's an A minor chord. And then this next chord is a G major. I don't need to do any reading to know that. I don't need to do any reading to know what key I'm in, to know what the different types of chords are, to know what the functions of chords are. So that's something I'm very passionate about, is learning that the tonic chord, the one chord, will always sound like home across any key and any mode for all time. It's pretty crazy. So understanding chords on a functional level really empowers you because it makes what seems incredibly complicated simple again. So the one chord, home at all times. So here's A minor, and I'll go to 5, and now let me come back home. I'm back home. There I am. Now that would be also the case if I was in C major. So now here's C. I'm going to play the 5 chord. This fell out. I put my harp in the car and bumped the very last peg, I'm afraid. So it's out. So here's 1, 5. And here's coming back home. Even though I was major, it still sounded like I was coming home. Versus the minor, still sounded like I was coming home as well. So I'm a huge advocate of learning your chords from function, because once you know like 1, 4, 5 that sound a certain way, and actually all of the 7 chords have their specific functions, this gives you huge freedom, and your musical vocabulary becomes quite precise. And when you want a certain kind of effect, you know you can use it. So for example, let me go into C major again. Here's the 1 chord. Now I'm going to use the 4 chord. Let's listen. I'm back to 1. For me, the 4 chord always has a quiet power. Let's take a listen. 1, here comes 4. It's dignified, right? Has almost like a holy sound to it. Let's do 1, 5, 1. See how that sounds? Now 5 is always brash, out there, strong, the dominant. It's called the dominant for a reason. It's strong. 1. Here comes 5. Right? So strong. 1. Back home. So just as a quick example, that gathering your tools together, knowing what different modes sound like, what the different function of keys sound like, knowing what different intervals sound like. This was something Sue talked about a lot. It really gives precision to your arranging, improvising, and composing. Gives you a lot of confidence in what you're doing. So theory, I really want to empower everybody and encourage you to look at theory. The biggest misnomer on the planet, it is not theory, it's reality. It's the architecture of music. And when you learn about the architecture of music, it's just so much easier to apply its principles to your expression, what you want to do. So we use these tools in order to get the feelings that are inside us outside onto the harp. And a lot of harpists tend to be adult learners, and so they learn theory in a little bit of a willy-nilly way, a little bit of here, a little bit there. And actually one of the ways that I really recommend that you look at theory is to take a theory course. And it could be an online theory course. It could be, there are programs now, apps that will teach you theory. A wonderful way is to find out what they use at university courses to start people out on theory and go through that book. Why? Because it's organized in such a way that it builds from the known to the unknown. And for adults who are starting to learn about theory, oftentimes what happens is they'll start from something known and then leap into the great unknown with so many missing pieces, and it becomes really disconcerting. It becomes kind of scary and you doubt yourself, and it's just nothing to do with your ability. It's just that the concepts haven't been built on step by step. And with theory, you really do want to build it up step by step. It's hard to understand theory if you are basically careening from kindergarten level to like university level and then 5th grade, 7th grade, 3rd grade, university. You really actually want to make sure that you move from the known to the next unknown, make that known in itself, and then move on. Because in music, everything builds on each other. And the good news is whatever you learn in music, you are bound to find it's applied to so many other things in music. So it's not like you're going to learn a certain theoretical concept and never use it again. I mean, that would be so unlikely. So whatever you do learn is really going to pay off. It's really going to be useful for you. So any questions on theory, let me know. This could include also learning, of course, different types of chords. Liza was talking about different kinds of extended chords, since she does a lot of jazz and Latin jazz. So they tend to do very colorful extended chords. So for example, let me do an A major and then adding a 7. What about if I do a major 7, which I'm going to stick the G sharp up? All these colors that you can use. What about an A major 6? Love it. What about suspended chords? I mean, I could go on forever about all these things. You want to, build up your tools, gather your tools. But the only caveat being, when you learn theory, do start from the ground up. And it may be that you encounter some things that you already know. Just double check yourself that you really do know those things before moving on, before jumping ahead. Because if you jump ahead, it's very easy to get stuck and discouraged. And really, there's no reason to feel discouraged. Theory is actually very natural. It just explains why music works. It explains the architecture behind it. And when you have that in your grasp, it makes things effortless. I mean, when you look at, for instance, Sharon's workshop about arranging on multiple levels. So she was arranging Celtic music, the same song, on 3 different levels of difficulty. She explained exactly how she was building up those chords. And it was really fascinating, and it was very theory based. And then with your tools, definitely consider effects as part of your toolbox. So Mary had, of course, the rapping on the soundboard as a drum, and she had all different kinds of effects going on with that. She had the strumming going on, which is very cool. Amy had the same idea with incorporating percussion into your playing. So by having these effects at the tip of your fingers, literally, you immediately can bring them into your arranging, your improvising, and composing. So practicing your effects as you would chords, as you would arpeggios, this is very, very valuable because you're building up your toolbox, you're refining your toolbox. So while I feel like the listening is perceiving all of this material on a very primal level, and then getting into the beginner's mind, simple approach keeps you very available for inspiration. When we come to the tools, that's all about naming what those things are, naming what chords are, naming what inversions are, naming all this theoretical stuff, naming your effects and knowing their effect. Because it's not just enough to name a chord. That's why I wanted to demonstrate the 1 and the 4, 5 chords. If you just name them, there's no emotional punch to that. But when I say, okay, I'm in C, and here's a C chord, which is home. You really feel that, and you're going to remember that throughout all pieces. But if I just say, oh, that's a C chord and that's a tonic, it's like, yeah, I could get that right on the written test, but what does that really mean? So for me, theory always has to have a emotional component, and that's where all these things start lining up with the listening. Keep it simple. Keep with your message of resonance and expression. Connect those to the facts of your tools. And honestly, in terms of tools, technique is a tool. So by increasing your technical abilities, knowing how much pad on the string, for example, what a difference it makes. So like here, I'm going to put a lot of pad in. Now I'm going to put very little pad. Creates a much more nasal sound. Being in control of those kind of things means your whole color palette is much, much wider. So building up your technique automatically means you have so much more to work with your arranging, with your composing, with your improvising. Now, as Lawrence said, that doesn't mean you have to wait until your technique is at a place where you can play absolutely virtuosic pieces. No, with a very good technique, you can play simple things. Just like that. It doesn't have to be a massive, quick etude. You can get a beautiful sound out of very simple movements that you have mastered at whatever level you are. The harp is such a beautiful instrument that right away we can get a beautiful sound out of it. And by simply relaxing, right there, you're on the way to good technique. So if this is the first time you're sitting behind a harp and I say, hey, why don't we play the red strings? And that you're relaxed, that's a beautiful sound. And maybe you're going to wander around a little bit. And right there, you're saying something musical. So the point is with technique is not only counting if it's at virtuoso level. Technique counts from day one, and it counts mostly starting with being relaxed. And then finally, with your tools, I'd love to consider that recording is a marvelous tool for you in your arranging, composing, improvising, because recording, and I'll talk more about this later, gives you wonderful feedback as to what you're doing. Sometimes it's hard for us to hear what we're doing. And when we record ourselves, we aren't emotionally in the middle of playing. So we actually hear better. And 9 times out of 10, if not 99 times out of 100, when you record and listen back, you'll find that you're playing too much. You're playing too many notes. There's not enough space and you're not breathing. And the good news is you get to simplify. You get to hang back. You get to relax. You get to play more in beginner's mind. And automatically your arranging, improvising, and composing will improve. So I consider recording to be a very important tool in your toolbox and one that you can use to really refine and give yourself a lot of confidence, honestly. Rarely, if ever, do people record themselves and feel like I'm not playing enough. They feel like that all the time when they're playing. But then when they step back and listen, they're like, oh, because again, the beautiful resonance of the harp has so much unique power. We are very, very different than any other instrument in this marvelous resonance. We always want to stay in touch with that this is a very unique beauty of the harp, is that resonance. And if we're playing a bunch of notes, we're kind of stepping on that resonance. Oh, thank you, Lois. Yeah, any questions, just pop them in and I will answer them for you. Okay, moving on. Actually, let me review, guys. Big takeaway. Number 1, listen to yourself, your harp, and to other types of music. So you're growing your musical vocabulary. Keep it simple. Beginner's mind, resonance, space. Third thing, gather and refine your tools. This is where we get super practical. We're dealing with technique. We're dealing with theory. And we're dealing with feedback, recording feedback. Next big theme, nourish your improvisation. Nourish your inspiration. So we need inspiration in order to create. And sometimes we forget to nourish that inspiration. So amongst the many inspirations that people were recommending are definitely going and listening to live music, listening to recorded music. I shared how poetry is a huge inspiration to me in my composition. So I will search through many, many poems. I mean, sometimes I'm sure it has been over 100 before I will find one that really touches me. And then I find that one, I'm like, ooh, there's the spark. And I start reading the poem out loud, and a melody comes to me, a rhythm comes to me, a mode comes to me. Huge source of inspiration. A lot of my songs come from there. Lawrence had been talking about aromatherapy as a big source of inspiration for him, and he has created a CD where he's naming the songs after various types of essential oils, and each piece is an improvisation on that oil. Hannah does exactly the same kind of work there, and also for her inspiration is guided meditations. So she shared a wonderful guided meditation with us. So her inspiration was coming from this very healing space, which actually a lot of our presenters were speaking about, this sort of spiritual inspiration that they feel and they use in all of their work. So keeping in touch with your spiritual core, no matter what your beliefs happen to be, there is an essence inside you, a life force, an undeniable life force, and staying in touch with that can really give that spark to your creativity, and remember why you create in the first place. I think a lot of the reason we create is actually being in touch with that essential part of ourselves, that true self, being in touch with our true self. And that's why it's such a craving for us to express it. Because it's hard to express your true self just in words, but music can do that. Storytelling, there's another huge source of inspiration, that a lot of songs actually follow a trajectory of a story. And oftentimes it will be a type of hero's journey where you have the situation, you make it complicated, and then you resolve it. So maybe you have a opening idea and you're playing it, you want to create a composition, and you're like, okay, now I'm going to add a little bit of discord to it because I'm going to make it complicated. I'm on the hero's journey. And then you get past all that complication, you resolve it. Right there can be a beautiful arc in composition. And this also works, as Beth and Sue said, within fixed songs. You know, what's the story in that song? And they had some Carolyn songs where there was like a little story that went through. And as you go through the story, you basically are creating sound effects in many ways. You know, so if something is more simple, you've got in terms of the emotion, then it's more sparse. And then if it gets more complicated, you know, you're louder, perhaps you're adding thicker chords. When you resolve, perhaps you'll go wider on the harp to create this magnificence. Right away, when you apply storytelling to songs, it gives you great direction as to improvising, arranging, composing. It really goes to the heart of why we make music, that we are telling stories. We're telling stories that are inside us, that are part of our core and part of our trying to make sense of life. You know, a lot of music is about trying to make sense. And then finally, the very last takeaway that I got was recording in all its forms as a very, very important part of arranging, improvising, and composing. Now, in my view, recording means all kinds of documentation of what you're doing. It could be recording on your phone. It could be recording by writing down. You're basically trying to capture the piece so that you don't lose it. And Destiny had been sharing a lot about her journey of learning to read music at high level, and how it made it so much easier for her to communicate her vision to other musicians that she was working with her collaborators. It also made it easier for her to see what she could add in addition to her pieces because she had the core written down. And then it was just so much easier to monitor what's happening. And that's definitely the case for me too. Now, personally, I don't like writing my music down. I find it actually very difficult to do. I'm a really good reader, but I'm a horrible writer downer. So what I do is I actually send my materials, my recordings, to a wonderful transcriber. And she writes everything down. And when I see the score come back, automatically it gives me all these new ideas. So the recording becomes important for me artistically in that way. And of course, it makes it much easier to communicate my pieces to other people. I mean, up until now, I have mostly played my pieces solo because they tend to be fairly challenging in terms of odd keys and things like that and strange modulations. They're not actually that physically difficult on the harp, but they are difficult to explain. But now I can play with other people, and it's been such a joy because I give them the score and they can see it. So that opens up whole new possibilities. And also for posterity, we have documented evidence of our compositions, and we get to add to the whole repertoire of harp. I mean, we rely on other people writing pieces, and we're so glad that they do, that we can read their scores. Let's add to that. Let's all add to our harp repertoire because it's at the moment quite small compared to other instruments. So for me, it's a bit of a mission to have people write down their compositions. Now, when I say write down, it doesn't have to actually be note for note. Some people write down a general roadmap, and that's perfectly fine as well. By having a roadmap, for instance, it may just be the melody line with some chords on top, lead sheet style, or it may simply be instructions like, be in this certain key for this amount of time and then switch to this kind of a shape for whatever amount of time you want. There can be very free form instructions that are basically following a concept that you have, following an inspiration that you have. So recording things, writing them down, you get to capture improvisations that otherwise would be gone forever. They would be ephemeral, right? They are ephemeral. And so many times I've heard people say, I did this improvisation. I wish I'd recorded it. Well, we can on our phones. Just stick your phone on and then try to ignore it because we don't want to feel, the electronic eye on us so much. We want to feel that beginner's mind when we're improvising. But when you're listening back, you'll capture things that you really want to turn into your permanent repertoire. And so this was something Tunde talked about. He said, really compositions are improvisations that have become part of your permanent repertoire. So for that reason, the recording is so important for posterity. It's important for improvisation because you get to, for inspiration. I don't know why I think improvisation and inspiration are so correlated today. I'll have to think about that. They are correlated, of course. When you have them written down, then you are just so much more able to see more possibilities for yourself. And again, to add to the harp repertoire, which I definitely encourage everyone to do because we need it. We have a small repertoire at the moment. So a couple of other, actually just one other tool of recording was the looper. And Sarah Boyna had a wonderful workshop on how she uses a looper in so many different ways. She really opened my mind to what the looper could do because I had a slight resistance to it because I felt it was sort of inorganic in that it repeats exactly the same every time. I mean, it's a loop and nothing in nature repeats absolutely identically every time. But the way that she was showing it was so imaginative and sounded so musical that if you haven't seen it, I definitely recommend you go and check it out. Super, super wonderful new ideas happening with that looper there. So just to go over what we talked about today, the major takeaways that I have from Virtual Harp Summit 3, which is so much material condensed into this 1 hour, is number one, listen. So it's listening to yourself, it's listening to your harp, is listening to other types of music. That's where it all starts. That's where the real inspiration for arranging, improvising, and composing comes from, is first listening, not immediately doing. Then keep it simple. Start simple. You don't need to start with something complicated. You can make it complicated later if the piece calls for it. So, for example, I have a piece called The Rhapsodist, and it has very complicated, dark emotions, and it does call for a complicated treatment. But then I have other songs where the absolute opposite is true, and we need clarity. But I started that piece in a very, very simple way, with a very strong melody, and then I built it out. So I did start simple, even with something that ended up complicated. So remembering again that the basic nature of the harp is resonance, and let's bring that out. Gather and refine your tools. Very practical. Let's get into theory. Let's get into technique. Let's get into effects that exist on the harp. And among your tools is studying other composers' compositions. This is something that I do. I actually sit there and I look at the score. I'm like, how did they get that effect? Ah, I see. And then you have the template for that effect, and you can bring it onto your harp. So the Hindemith, for example, the Sonata for Harp, is one of my favorite classical pieces, and I can't play it on the lever harp. I can do many workarounds, but that piece I can't. There's just too many pedal changes. Nonetheless, I studied the score because there's still things that I can do on the harp that's my version, and it creates that very powerful effect as well. So when you're gathering and refining your tools, you're really working on very practical matters. Nourish your inspiration. This was a big theme that ran throughout Virtual Harp Summit 3. Take time to nourish that inspiration. Go listen to music. Sit at home and listen to music. Appreciate great works of art. Go into nature. Cook. Whatever it is that brings you joy and inspires you. This is not a waste of time. It is not a luxury. It is not taking you away from the harp. It's actually giving you the raw materials that are going to come out as your arrangements, your improvisations, and your compositions. So do nourish your inspiration. This is an actual part of creativity. It's a huge part of creativity, actually. So I'd really love to encourage you to enjoy yourself and listen to yourself as to what you really love, and bring that into your life on a regular basis. When we are starved of beauty, we are not creative anymore. We can't be. So this is actually a very serious point, nourishing your inspiration. And then finally, recording is actually a very, very big part of arranging, improvising, and composing. It helps you keep track of what you're doing. It helps you capture beautiful things that you have created that might have been part of an improvisation and otherwise would be gone to the winds. I just spoke about studying other people's compositions and how that's a great source of ideas. Even studying your own music written down can be, whoa, I wrote that and now I have all these other ideas. Many applications for recording. So use that as an integral part of your practice. So those are the takeaways that I have so far, and I would love to answer some of your questions. So Hélène says, actually, let me show her comment on the screen. I can do that. Why is it that so many times there's a specific part in a score of music that is so challenging to learn and play fluently when learning a new song? Even though I repeat it, it always seems to be challenging. So, Hélène, the way that you practice is really, really important. Just repeating something will not necessarily get you the results that you want unless you change the way you're repeating it. If you just repeat something that is challenging the same way, it will continue to just get actually ingrained as a habit. So instead, I would say stop, break it apart. So the 3 types of musical memory that I teach are, number 1, auditory. So auditory means you can actually sing the song in your head in full. That means the left and the right hand together. So the reason you have to sing it in your head is because you can't sing more than one note out loud unless you are a Tuvan throat singer, which is amazing. So for that section that is challenging, Ellen, I would suggest you stop and you sing it in your head and you be able to hear it in its full glory. You want to feel that you actually have that song embedded in your body. The next point would be that you look at it analytically. And this can only happen after you've got the auditory done first. The analytical is you look at that challenging section, you're like, okay, what's this actually made up of? What key am I in? What are the chords that are associated? What are the patterns? What's my fingering? What's my technique? You want to know it on a practical level. Now, it's important to look at it hands separately to understand the different patterns. But as soon as possible, get those hands together, because the next and final type of memory, the third type, is kinetic memory, kinesthetic memory. And that's physical, choreographical memory. And that's where you know how your fingers are actually moving together as a dance. You know the physicality of your piece. And just as you would if you were a dancer, where you know your steps consciously. This is very different than muscle memory. Muscle memory is just you kind of trusting your body to go along with playing it, but that's not a type of conscious memory. That's actually habit, and it's nothing you can control consciously. Kinesthetic memory is totally different. It's like you could go ultra slow motion and you would know exactly which finger is landing when. It gives you a great sense of confidence. So, Hélène, I would recommend that you look at that challenging section. Check your auditory memory on it. Can you sing it in full, in your head, away from the harp? Step 2, can you analyze it? That means you literally know what it's made up of theoretically. So you know the key, you know the chords, you know the fingering. Finally, kinesthetic memory. Do you know physically what you're doing, what the dance is between the hands? And when you look through those 3 types of memory, once you come out the end of those 3, you will feel so much more confident in that challenging part. So do try this out and let me know how it works for you, because I would love to hear if it works for you or not. And then if it doesn't, we will find new solutions. So I hope that was helpful, Hélène. And Emily is saying, resonance, do you prefer fewer notes to more? Could you say more? Here's the thing. I got attracted to the harp because of the sound. And when you play a lot of notes at once, it still sounds harpy, but it sounds more guitar-like. It starts to sound more like other instruments. It definitely sounds like a harp, but it's not that different from other instruments. But yeah, you're welcome, Ellen. But when I have less notes, it creates a fascination for me. It's where I get that magical sound. So, do I prefer it? It really depends what I'm trying to say musically. I would say I always crave those moments of fewer notes. And in every one of my compositions, there will be moments when there are very few notes. On the other hand, I also love to deal with complicated subject matter. I love to deal with multiple layers of reality. So my songs will, in truth, oftentimes contain quite a lot of notes, but I'm always conscious of, are they there for a reason? Are they saying what I want to say at that moment? Do I have too many notes going on? I'm always trying to edit myself. And my editing goes in the direction of less notes. So it's a really good question you ask, Emily. Do I prefer fewer notes to more? It really depends on the circumstance, but I know that on the harp, less is more in general. So I will try to wean myself off a bunch of notes. Now, I am a classical pianist as well, so we're addicted to thick, big chords, which sound great on the piano, but they do not sound good on the harp. I mean, it's sort of like a yin-yang situation between harp and piano in many ways. So, Emily, it's a great question. I just like yin-yang, active, passive. I receptive and moving forward. I like to have both. I want to have both. In the end of the day, it'll be that I err on the side of less notes. I will admit that, but I'm not always there. I'm not there. There's still a lot in life that I'm, woodshedding and trying to say, and it takes more notes. Sometimes I don't yet have that Zen quality where I can be extremely sparse at all times. And I may never have that. It may not be in my chart. I hope that was useful to you, Emily. Yeah. So, any other questions from anyone? I would love to hear if you have any thoughts. I'll probably head out in a couple minutes, but we were talking today about the top takeaways, and of course, our theme was arranging, improvising, and composing. As you know, you're so welcome, Emily. Any questions on those top takeaways? Again, to remind you what they were listen. They were keep it simple, gather and refine your tools, nourish your inspiration, and recording actually is being a key part of all of this kind of creativity, of the arranging, improvising, and composing. Yeah. Samantha, thank you. Yeah. I do feel like the harp has a uniquely spiritual character. Yeah. And that we have the chance to impart that kind of energy in the world. We have the opportunity right now that's so needed of bringing, beauty and acceptance, space, listening, tolerating contrast. We can do this. So I would love to encourage all of you to arrange, improvise, and compose for these reasons. I mean, we need your voice. And as you arrange, improvise, and compose, it is your voice coming through the harp. We need it. We really, really need it in the world. So every act of creativity that you bring, I feel a butterfly effect, the butterfly effect where it just compounds as time goes on and it ripples throughout the world. It's important. Yeah. So, thank you, Margie. You are very, very welcome. Yeah, I was really, really excited to do this follow-up because there was so much information. And as I was putting together this takeaways and it's like, what are the big themes? I start listening, right? What are the themes coming through? These were the way that I could kind of corral all this information together. So yeah. I'm glad this was nourishing for you. I love that word. Yeah. And the work that you do, Margie, is so nourishing. It is part of this butterfly effect where you're going out and playing this healing harp and duet work, that you're collaborating, musical collaboration. There's another fabulous model for this energy that we are putting out in the world as harpists. So that's what I have for you today, everybody. We're already working on Virtual Harp Summit 4, and the theme is practice and performance, both aspects. And as always, you can find us on Facebook. It's facebook.com/Virtual Harp Summit. And there you'll be able to find all kinds of fun things about the harp. You can always communicate with us that way in between summits. We don't disappear. And yeah, we're a real community. So I would love to see you over there. Go ahead and like the page. facebook.com/Virtual Harp Summit, because then you'll get notifications about when I do these Facebook Lives, and you'll get notifications about new things posted on the page. There's always fun stuff going on there. So it's a great place to hang out. And there we have it for today. So any last questions before I go? Otherwise, I just want to say thank you for being here. It's just been great fun, and it's been a great opportunity for me to really pull together my big thoughts on Virtual Harp Summit 3. So bye for now, everybody.